Hey, sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to BBallBreakdown and the podcast. If you're listening to this on YouTube, don't forget that there's a link on the screen or in the description to listen to the whole thing over at iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you want, because you're going to want to hear the whole thing with Ethan Skolnick, who, for the next 2 weeks at least, will still be with Bleacher Report writing on NBA stuff, and you can hear him across the radio airwaves and sometimes on SiriusXM. And Ethan, thanks for joining us. I'm glad to talk to you about the NBA.
Good to be with you, Nick.
I thought in honor of, or as an homage to what Howard Beck and Zach Lowe were doing the other day on his podcast with the Lakers and their three-peat and the interesting discussion there, you were pretty much ground zero in Miami for the Heat's rise to prominence with LeBron James and the decision. So I thought maybe we could kind of just talk about that and what that was like the first time you heard about it. So do you remember where you were, what was going on when the initial shockwaves or even rumors that LeBron might come down to Miami? Do you remember what was happening at that point?
Yeah, I remember it well. I'll never forget it. At the time, I was working for the South Florida Sun-Sentinel as a columnist. I'd been there for 7 or 8 years, and I'd been covering the Heat, the Dolphins, primarily the Heat, for the previous several years. And, obviously we knew Miami was in the mix, but we didn't know it was going to happen. But something strange happened that day, which was that I got word from somebody else at the Sun-Sentinel who worked in the advertising department that the Heat had taken out an ad that was going to have LeBron, Dwyane, and Chris together. So I went from believing that really this probably wasn't going to happen, that LeBron ultimately would either stay in Cleveland, maybe go to Chicago, maybe go to New York, but then Miami was still kind of on the outside looking in, that probably the Heat would have Dwyane and Chris, and to all of a sudden thinking, oh my God, this is actually going to happen. But of course, those things, and this is, as this actually turned out, those things sometimes can be a little misleading because the Heat had actually taken out 2 ads in our paper. I didn't find that out until later. They'd done that with all 3 South Florida papers, and one ad had Chris and Dwyane, and one ad had LeBron in it. So it was basically a hit send when you get the news. And so it's a good thing I didn't go too strong with it, although I guess I would have looked smart at the time. But I was basically like a lot of other people. I was watching on television, waiting for Jim Gray to get to the point so we could finally find out exactly where he was going to play. And when he said he was taking his talents to South Beach, obviously we knew everything was going to change, and everything did change. For me professionally, I ended up only staying at the Sun-Sentinel for a few more months because the Palm Beach Post, the paper I'd worked at before, decided to resurrect their Heat beat with LeBron coming down and decided they wanted someone experienced to be their Heat columnist. And I ended up actually leaving the Sun-Sentinel 3 months after that to go to the Palm Beach Post to cover the Heat full time. So it changed my career. It changed a lot of people's career. There's a lot of people in South Florida who got much bigger platforms as a result of LeBron coming down. I think we had sort of an idea that night. The night that it really hit me what this was going to be about and that I really wanted to be around it every day, not just as a columnist a couple times a week, was when the Heat had their infamous party, their celebration, which, I think got played worse around the country than it really was. It was really for season ticket holders. But being in the building that night and the energy and the electricity in the building that night, and having been around sort of the moribund Dolphins for several years, I basically decided, okay, if there is an opportunity to do this full time, this is what I want to do. And then a couple months later, the opportunity arose.
So the party you're talking about is the not 1, not 2,
Yes.
not 3 party, right?
Yes.
Where the pyrotechnics and whatnot. But you certainly understood why that might have received some amount of criticism, I imagine, right?
Yeah, no, I understood why it received criticism, but I think, again, there was a disconnect with South Florida and the rest of the country. And I've always said that if LeBron had stayed in Cleveland, there wouldn't have been an issue. But if there wouldn't have been an issue at all with the decision, because it would have been, okay, he raised money for charity and he stayed home. So we watched for nothing, but he did the right thing. If he'd gone to New York, I've always believed that the media would have celebrated it, because most of the national media has either ties to New York or is based within 120 miles of New York. And so whether it was ESPN, whether it was some of the major newspapers, I've always believed that if he'd gone to New York, there would not have been the backlash that there was with him going to Miami. And part of the problem with Miami is that it's perceived around the country as a vacation town, as a place that, it has a lot of, sort of new immigrants. It does not a lot of people who have roots in the area. That's not as true anymore as it used to be, but it's kind of the perception of it. And so there was a perception from the very beginning that Miami didn't deserve him, and I think that then when they threw the, sort of the laser light show and LeBron flexed and Bosh spoke Spanish and everything else that happened that night, I think that played into the perception of, well, this isn't right. Why is he there? He shouldn't be there. He should be in Cleveland, or he should be in a real city like New York. And I think that's really what happened there. And I actually think that colored the next 4 years. I was around LeBron a lot this past year covering him in Cleveland. And it was just fascinating to me as the one person who was around him so much for 3 years in Miami and then around him so much in Cleveland the next year, was that he could say the exact same things, but he got so much more, excuse the pun, heat for it when he was in Miami. It was amazing how the perception of him changed when really he wasn't that different in one place as opposed to the other. So I kind of feel like he got, and the city of Miami got, this really raw deal in terms of the way that the public and the media viewed them for that period of time in Miami, particularly before LeBron won a championship. Mm-hmm. And I think now it's swung the other direction, where when LeBron doesn't win a championship, it's, oh, well, he didn't have enough help. His teammates didn't do enough. If the same thing happened in Miami, LeBron would have, he would have gotten unjustly, because he didn't have enough help this year. There's no arguing that. But he would have gotten unjustly killed for it while he was with Miami. So maybe I'm a little bit of a Miami homer seeing that through that lens, but I just think there has been a real difference in the way that the national media has treated his time as when it's been in Cleveland and when it's been in Miami.
But one thing I want to talk about before we wrap up is the relationship between Blatt and LeBron. Like, has that, we did see them have this kind of almost an amazing moment right after, when they finished the Hawks off, perhaps, and they were on their way to the finals, and they kind of, I don't know if they hugged on the bench, but there was some words spoken. Do you think that kind of, now that they are men now, they've gone through a bit of that fire, did that repair the coach-player relationship as well?
I don't know if repair is the right word. I think it's always going to be a work in progress. But I do think that, what LeBron said, I remember we were in Columbus before they played the Bulls in the preseason, and LeBron, said, look, they asked him about Blatt and his teammates, but in particular Blatt, and he was very upfront. He's like, look, I don't know. I won't know until we go through some adversity, and that's how he views these things. I mean, he judges his teammates, his coaches, people around him by how they handle adversity. I do know that for the majority of the playoffs last year, he was pretty happy with how his group, his teammates, handled adversity until, as he said, after they lost, we just ran out of talent, which I know a lot of people took that as kind of haughty, but I mean, it was true. They did. They ran out of talent to a certain degree. I think, when you're playing Dellavedova 40 minutes, you've probably run out of talent in a final situation. So I think, look, it's going to be scrutinized. There's going to be things blown out of proportion that aren't really there. As long as Tyronn Lue is on that staff, there's always going to be a question because, look, LeBron's relationship with him is very strong. He's making a lot of money for an assistant. He was the favorite of some people inside that organization before they hired Blatt. I mean, Alvin Gentry was the real favorite of some. Gilbert, was really the one who sort of had the most influence when it came to hiring Blatt. But, I think the reason I'm not going to rule out their relationship getting better is because his relationship with Erik got better. I mean, there's no question about it. And I don't think it was as contentious the first year as it got at times. Again, I think some of it was blown out of proportion in both cases. But I saw his relationship with Erik evolve to the point where he went from kind of contradicting Erik in the press to parroting Erik in the press and using a lot of Erik's expressions, and still does, actually, like a lot of them. Actually, when I'm in Cleveland, sometimes I feel like I'm in Miami because when I'm listening to LeBron, I hear a lot of Erik in terms of things he says. So and if you talk to people who've covered him longer, they'll say they hear a lot of Mike Brown. So it's not like he's ignoring all of this stuff. It's just that he processes and picks and chooses. And the biggest thing I'll say about LeBron that just gets totally overlooked with him is just he is extraordinarily intelligent. He just is. And I think sometimes he's looked at like a caricature in some ways. People say, oh, yeah, we know he's got basketball IQ, but they don't understand. Like when he deals with the media, he will answer the same question differently from two different people if he knows one and doesn't know the other. I mean, his mind is constantly working, whether it's remembering a play from 2008, okay, or where someone was supposed to be. So, I mean, he's processing everything that everybody is telling him at an extraordinarily high level. It's just a question of sometimes, because he has very strong views and opinions and knows how to play the game, he's going to reject some of it. And, you know, I mentioned Ray Allen earlier. I had this conversation with Ray, and this ended up playing out in his last year. I had this conversation with Ray early in his last year. I was doing a story about intelligence in the NBA and kind of the what challenges it provides for guys who are really smart, and I talked to Shane about this, and I talked to James Jones and Roger Mason and some others who are among the guys I consider to be more intelligent guys I've dealt with. And Ray said, look, it's been a problem for me because, a lot of times the coach thinks I'm undermining him because I might have a different viewpoint on how to do things. And so he feels like it's been a problem for him at times, that it's created tension. And I think the same is true of LeBron. I mean, LeBron looks up to Ray in an extreme way. He was very close with Ray when Ray was in Miami with him, and I think that LeBron has gotten the perspective of, look, I know this game as well as anybody else, and some things I'm going to be told, I'm going to agree with, and I'm going to process, and I'm going to incorporate, and other things I'm told, they not work for me. And I think that's what we see. But again, with him, everything is a huge story.
Well, when we talk about the most intelligent players in the NBA, we also could talk about the most intelligent writers we have of the NBA, and you are certainly among that group. I've always enjoyed reading your stuff at Bleacher Report. I suppose we're not going to get a breaking story here on where we're going to find you after this, but at least tell us where we can find you, on Twitter and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I will be somewhere soon, but for right now at Ethan J. Skolnick, EthanJSkolnick, that's where you can find me.
Okay, well, don't forget to give him a good follow, and we'll read everything he writes because he's got the finger on the pulse of the NBA. And Ethan, thanks for joining us. And don't forget, sports fans, at BBallBreakdown, we're not a channel, we're a conversation. You in? You in, Ethan?
I'm in.